Good morning, Dumelang, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome to you at home, our government communicators and respective representatives joining us on this webinar. My name is Tsatsi Rankapule. I'm the head of public sector sales at Prime Media. I will be your host today, guiding you through the webinar, fielding some questions that you may have for the panel. On that note, let me introduce the panelists properly. Our first speaker will be Melissa McNally. Melissa McNally has 15 years of research experience and obtained her MA in research psychology from the University of Witwatersrand, where she specialized in gender-based violence, human rights advocacy, race relations, and policy development. Her bio goes on and on. She's basically our master shifu of research. And Sharon Mahlatse is our Media Insights Manager. She has over 8 years experience as a media strategist working across TV, radio, and digital. She is in charge of implementing high quality data-driven decisions for business through supporting sales, marketing, and programming initiatives. She is our master splinter of data and insights in the business. Lynn Schroeder is our digital commercial executive. After achieving a degree in brand strategy from Vega and being awarded as the top achiever in his graduating year, he joined VMLY and R as a social media strategist and a digital media strategist. Thereafter, he joined Prime Media Broadcasting to accelerate digital innovation through creative solutions to deliver high quality, effective campaigns for clients and partners. Dean is our digital Kung Fu master. You can see what I've been doing during lockdown. I've been watching a lot of cartoons. Now I will hand over to my first panelist and presenter, Melissa McNally. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we're going to take you through our insights pertaining to our listeners and their sentiments regarding the government during COVID-19 and the pandemic. So if we look at the running order today, just to give you some intro into this, it's really the research and context that I'm going to take you through, as well as who we spoke to during this time and sentiment regarding the listeners. And then Sharon will take you through consumer shifts and communication strategies, as well as key insights that came out of our research. So just examining the actual research. Essentially, we conducted the research utilizing our panel called Prime Connect. If we examine Prime Connect, most of the sample came from Gauteng for this actual sample, as well as from the Western Cape and then KZN. If you look on the left-hand side, you can actually see over here the stations that the respondents came from. In terms of the municipalities that the sample came from, was primarily from Ekurhuleni, as well as City of Joburg. And then we're going to also look at here in the Western Cape. It was also around City of Cape Town. And then KZN, it was eThekwini. We have 669 respondents that we actually sampled for this. And now we're going to go into the remainder of the actual data and the content. If you do have questions throughout this presentation, please do feel free to use the chat function as we go along, and we'll take your questions after the fact. So examining our actual listeners and their sentiments, the majority of our listeners were confident that the presidency and the national government had effectively addressed the threat posed by the spread of coronavirus. They expressed confidence in the drastic steps taken during lockdown. However, they are concerned about the economy, their financial well-being, and the future of the country post-COVID. Examining a study conducted by Ipsos in terms of preparedness of governments, we can see South Africa fared quite well. However, China and Vietnam receiving the highest scores. The sentiment is carried through in terms of our listeners, and what we can see is they were extremely satisfied with regards to the level of leadership that the president displayed during the coronavirus pandemic, having a high top 2 box score. So when I say top 2 box score throughout this presentation, I'm referring to scores over here in terms of good and excellent, or we'll see satisfied and extremely satisfied later on. What we see here is lower levels of neutrality starting out here. So we have a top 2 box score of 86% in total. in terms of having high levels of satisfaction. Reasons for these scores in terms of the high satisfaction and positive sentiment that we're seeing is due to the clear and decisive decision-making made by the president and government during this pandemic, as well as the progressiveness and the fact that the decisions were driven by science and were not merely anecdotal, as well as the proactive response demonstrated by the president, as well as professionalism. We can also see that this actually ripples through and creates high levels of pride in South Africans at this point in time, with 35% of our respondents indicating that they were extremely proud to be South African. Interestingly, when we look at the score from 7 to 10, this is 80% of our sample indicating that they're proud to be South African. When we conducted the study, it was actually conducted in the last week of stage 5 and the first week of stage 1, just to give you context. And the sample is primarily comprised of SEM 7 to 10 respondents. And if we move on to general sentiment in terms of making decisions for the country, just under 70% of the listeners feel that the government is making the best decisions for the country at this point in time. However, they need to understand more around the actual stages and the phased approach. So there tends to be a lack of information with regards to the actual phases and further to that information regarding each phase. So 74% of our respondents felt that they need to develop more of an understanding regarding the different rules and regulations per each stage. The vast majority of our listeners felt that the extended lockdown was necessary and that stage 5 helped to flatten the curve. 77% of the respondents felt that stage 5 actually helped to reduce the spread of coronavirus. Over here, you can see 91% of our respondents actually indicating that they felt that the extended lockdown was necessary. If you look at the regions, it's slightly higher in KZN. And we see this kind of nuance throughout the data as we go along the presentation. You'll see this. Over here, generally the respondents indicated that they were extremely satisfied with the government initiatives that were implemented. Over here, what we've done is we've got a top 2 box score here on the right-hand side, and that is a combination of slightly satisfied and extremely satisfied. And over here on your left-hand side, you'll see bottom box scores of extremely dissatisfied and slightly dissatisfied. In terms of where we see people being extremely satisfied, this is around the increase in health budget, increased sanitization and provision of water, the donation of 1/3 of the salaries of senior politicians to assist those affected by the pandemic, as well as the provision of shelter to the vulnerable, and social and economic support programs of 500 billion rand, also bearing quite positively amongst our listeners. When we look at areas of improvement from a bottom 2 box score, as well as when we look at areas of high neutrality, we can see that there are concerns around the rollout of food assistance via SASSA as well. And we'll see throughout our data that food assistance and the provision of food parcels is actually an area of concern for many of South Africans at this point in time, bearing in mind that our sample is still upper LSMs or SEMs. Also, there's concerns around the phased reopening of the economy with risk adjustment, and this comes down to understanding, which Sharon will talk about a little bit later in terms of areas of opportunity. UIF COVID-19 benefits, once again, an educational job to be done here, and the formulation of the Solidarity Fund to assist small businesses. So how are we communicating to small businesses now? We'll have a look at our sample later, and we'll see that we have quite a high percentage of listeners who had businesses when we went into lockdown, or who still have businesses at this point in time. Further to that, we also see door-to-door screening or testing of citizens being marred by a little bit of confusion as well. And if we have a look here on the right-hand side, having our lowest satisfaction levels. When we look at restrictions that were placed on individuals, we generally see that restrictions pertaining to the closure of South African borders having a high top 2 box score. So people are generally satisfied with how this was implemented, as well as travel restrictions and restrictions regarding gatherings and public transport limitations. Interestingly, when we actually look at where our listeners are dissatisfied, it's generally going to be around the purchase of alcohol and cigarettes, as well as limitations regarding outdoor exercise and freedom of movement, essentially. But further to that, we also see areas of concern being around the purchase of essential items and the closure of businesses in this space. Once again, this is more in terms of the educational elements that are required in this regard. And looking at our data, we've seen that many individuals have been impacted financially. And further to this, in a study conducted by Ipsos, 90% of the respondents from South Africa indicated that they imagined that they would be impacted financially because of lockdown. This level is similar to that of Vietnam, but it follows a similar trend across the world. However, Germany obviously bucking the trend with regards to this. When we look at our own data, this is reiterated once again, with loss of income or reduction of salary being a primary concern of many consumers, as well as fear of job loss and retrenchment. What's quite interesting and what we've started noticing is mental health and wellness has been highlighted at this point in time, with an impact on mental health and wellness coming up throughout many of our studies. If we look at businesses, we see the financial trend once again impacting them, with 20% of our respondents indicating that they owned a business, with many of them citing that lockdown had caused their businesses to close down or had caused catastrophic loss of income. Many of them stating that they couldn't actually move their product at this point in time because they were considered non-essential services. So what this meant was if their clients were overseas, they were generally using a new supplier in these cases. Many of them closing their businesses because of the inability to pay staff and bills at this point in time. So this has resulted in anxiety levels obviously increasing for a third of our respondents, just over a third of our respondents. Over here, we can see almost half of our respondents are actually quite anxious at this point in time. And this is driven by various nuances across the regions, but we can see that on a total level, this is due to the fact that South Africans are not taking lockdown seriously, as well as the impact of lockdown on the economy in the future, as well as job loss and retrenchment. When we look at this on a regional level, what we note is that in Gauteng, job loss and retrenchment is more of a concern, as well as for KZN. However, in KZN, what's quite interesting to see is personal financial impact is more important and driving more anxiety for them, as well as the education of their children. Many of us can relate to this as we're wearing many hats right now, trying to educate our children from home and trying to run our households, and there is the financial threat. So most of this data is definitely reiterating what we're all feeling as well. If we look at the Western Cape, for example, we see that others not taking lockdown seriously is more important within the Western Cape region, as well as the impact of lockdown on the economy and the future of the economy. And as our psychological and physiological needs are threatened by the impact of the pandemic at this point in time, it's going to also impact how we receive information. So there's an increased expectation from respondents for the government to perform in terms of providing the relevant services, as well as communicating effectively with the public at this point in time. Over here, if we look at the left-hand side, food security is a concern for almost 50% of our listeners. And if we go on to the next slide, listeners are generally satisfied with how the national government and provincial government are handling the pandemic. If we look at the response to the pandemic over here on a national level, we see a top two box of 76%. So relatively high satisfaction levels. If we look at levels of neutrality here, slightly higher than what we saw at the beginning, but this starts to increase as we start to get into the various levels. So if we go onto a provincial level, our top two box score of satisfaction being 64%, higher levels of neutrality. I always say to my clients that you need to be careful and very aware of these levels of neutrality that you see here, because you need to mitigate risk of this swinging downwards and becoming more negative over time. If we have a look at a municipal level, there seems to be less satisfaction here and higher levels of neutrality. What this says to me really is that there seems to be an issue possibly with communication regarding municipal level data that they're receiving or that respondents are receiving. So they may not be getting the message clearly over here. So we dug into the data a little bit deeper, and then what we found was there are various gaps. And what we can tell is on a national level in terms of communication, individuals need less contradiction from ministers in terms of the information that they're receiving. They also need to understand why certain restrictions are being placed, such as hot food bans. There was a lot of contradiction around this, causing a lot of confusion for many respondents. There also needs to be better communication around the phased approach, and there has to be better updates on cases according to respondents, as well as communication around small business assistance. When we look at a provincial level, more people need to understand the control that is being placed on a provincial level, as well as where they can get food distribution and where the parcels are being distributed, as well as the shelter that is being provided. If we look at a municipal level, as well as door-to-door screening, I almost forgot one of the most important things. Many of our listeners indicating that they're not certain about the process with regards to door-to-door screening. On a municipal level, many individuals indicating that they're actually uncertain as to what is happening on a municipal level in terms of communication. So that seems to be where the gap is. It's perception around communication. Just bearing in mind that this data is perceptual data. And then over and above that, many people saying that they have uncertainty regarding the rules and regulations for complexes and estates. And many of them saying that they feel that there's significant police presence in some areas and then a significant lack thereof in other areas. But if we look at general satisfaction scores in terms of our respondents, and we asked them, over the past 12 months, do you feel that service delivery in your province had increased or decreased? And what we saw is for just over a third of our respondents on a provincial level, they indicated that they had actually had an improvement in terms of service delivery, much higher though in the Western Cape. And this trend tends to carry on throughout the data. And we've seen it in previous studies that we've conducted in terms of service delivery for the provinces as well as municipalities. This trend is similar for the municipal level as well, with just over a third of our respondents indicating that they believe there was an increase in the past year in terms of service delivery on a municipal level, and 40% in the Western Cape, you can see here, and slightly lower in Gauteng. So when examining the municipal services, our listeners have indicated that they have higher levels of satisfaction regarding the provision of waste or rubbish removal throughout the year. Water provision during lockdown, as well as general sanitation, received positive scores from our respondents. However, I do believe if there were higher perceptions in terms of positive communication from our respondents, that these scores would be higher and less of your hard work would go unnoticed. Interestingly, areas of concern or areas of improvement are really around general maintenance of areas throughout the year, as well as provision of housing to the poor or vulnerable during lockdown, maintenance of municipal parks and roads throughout the year. And interestingly here, just to kind of reiterate our hypothesis throughout this presentation, municipal engagement with the media and citizens scoring a lower score and having a very high level of neutrality. So if you look at that, that gives us a combined score of over 60% right over here. So definitely an area of improvement in terms of communicating with the public effectively. I'm now going to hand over to Sharon, but if you do have any questions, please do pose them and I'd be glad to answer them. Thank you so much for your time.
Melissa?
Yep.
There is a question here. Melissa, can clients of Primedia ask for additional research through the panel if they need to understand something specific?
Yes, they can. So Tsatsi, thank you so much for that. So with our panel, you're more than welcome to pose questions. We do offer this service as a value add to all clients. And what we can do there is assist you in crafting your solutions as well and your strategies effectively. You're more than welcome to drop me a mail after this. Here is my email address with your questions as well, or you can post them to Tsatsi, who will give them to me as well.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. I'm now going to take you through the communication and consumer shifts that we've seen as a result of lockdown. As Melissa has already indicated in most of the data that you went through, listeners want to hear communication from the government. So we've seen from the data, we've gathered a few key themes that have come up when it comes to communication. The first one is information around various stages. respondents indicating that they would like to get clear communication as well as simple communication or less contradictions when it comes to communicating different stages of the lockdown. I mean, with the president having advised us or having addressed us last night, and also mentioning the fact that there would be different areas of high levels of infections might be remaining in level 4, with others areas going to level 3. I think people would obviously appreciate communication in that regard and less contradictions so that we avoid confusions. There's also an issue around transparency when it comes to funding for small businesses, as well as relief for the unemployment fund. Information around where screening and testing is taking place, and also around infection prevention is still very much expected. Also, another big focus in this area is the issue and how how this has actually impacted the country as a whole, and what the future outlook looks like. As Melissa has already indicated, we also listeners are also expecting information around where food parcels can be collected, and also they are indicating that they would also like to know how they can get involved and how. When it comes to listeners wanting to hear more information around services that are available through their municipalities, we see that around 80% of our listeners have indicated that yes, they would like to hear information in this regard, and we see the trend across the 3 provinces. When it comes to preferred channels of communication from government, we see TV coming up the highest, followed by social media as well as radio. And we know that these 3 channels can actually be used together in order to enhance your reach into your target markets. We're now going to go into the next slide, where we're going to see how radio and how consumer shifts have actually changed during this time due to the lockdown. So we've seen different changes in radio listening, obviously, because people will get information from social media, but they would still turn to radio to obviously verify the information. We've seen from different studies that radio is actually the most trusted medium, and also people find information on radio as credible. So due to social distancing, changing behavior, we've seen that globally more people are listening to more radio. Those are the 2 studies that we're referencing, the one from Bauer and also from Nielsen. We're also seeing that obviously people are spending more time at home now, resulting in more listening from their homes, and also listening from their cars being decreasing during this time. We're seeing the trend being replicated almost for the South African market, actually to even a greater extent, where we're seeing from a Global Web Index study, 36% of South Africans indicating that they're listening to more radio now due to the outbreak. And also this study by Kantar supporting this fact, also indicating that 35% of respondents are listening to more radio during this time. Let's see how our listeners have also been responding when it comes to listening to radio during this time. We've done a lockdown survey at the beginning of lockdown, just to ask and check how our listeners are listening to radio during this time. And we've seen that radio usage has increased for almost 30% of our listeners during this time. When it comes to the devices that they're using to listen to their radios most often, we see that the terrestrial radio is still coming out tops, followed by mobile device, and also in-car listening, obviously being used when they go to the shops to get essentials, and also by people that are still able to go to work during this time. When it comes to our listeners, we also see other forms of audio increasing during this time, with our listeners having increased their podcast usage by about 17%. So now I'm just going to take you through how we've seen this being driven in radio. We're seeing that obviously radio provides a sense of connection to communities and reduces loneliness. Hence, we've seen these increases in radio. The study that was conducted in the UK by BOA actually has found that 70% of people agree that radio makes them feel in touch with the world. 46% of people agreeing that radio makes them feel more connected to their communities, with 44% of people saying that radio makes them feel less alone. We know that radio is powerful in a way that it obviously provides companionship, and it doesn't have to interfere with you doing your work or your study. And it is for this mood boosting environment of radio that, you know, we're seeing one of the studies that was conducted by Radio Center actually mentioning that people feel twice as happy when they're listening to the radio, and that obviously results in a good engagement or enhancement of engagement with advertising by about 30%. So let's look at how the public sector can use radio to help the public during this crisis. The first thing that radio can be used during this time in order to relay messages of help by the public sector is to first educate the public, obviously through relaying reliable and factual information around the pandemic, and also just informing people around what the progress is and how, what are the initiatives that are being used to fight the pandemic. Radio can also be used to bring people together, you know, through facilitating community, offering empathy, and providing social support. And this is very important right now because it can breach the physical distance that is imposed by social distancing. Another important thing that radio can help you you know, reach your audiences is also through communicating your products and services, so that you can obviously help people meet their challenges that have been presented by this pandemic, especially the people that are in need, such as health workers or people that have been forced into unemployment due to the economic environment. So, you know, products and services such as SASSA services, economic relief for the unemployed, and such services obviously can be communicated during this time. And when communication is being done, it needs to be conducted in a very empathetic and transparent manner, and brands need to remain true to their purpose. So let's now look at how the sources of credible information that consumers have indicated that they're most likely to trust. When it comes to issues of health and science and all of that, almost 80% of the respondents citing that they would, they prefer or trust doctors and health authorities when it comes to this. When it comes to issues around brand functionalities or benefits, people indicate that they would trust brands, technical experts. And when it comes to issues around communicating organizational issues and all of that, people say that they would actually trust the organization's CEO. One example that I can think of now is the co-founder and CEO of Airbnb. As we know, Airbnb is one of the organizations that are affected the most during this pandemic. And, you know, Brian Chesky has just been offering information and guidance because obviously they have to restructure due to what has happened, and they had to let go of their teammates, as he refers to them. And he's also just collated a database of all those teammates that that they're going to be parting with, and he's taken it upon himself to make sure that he connects them with other people that are hiring during this time. And he's also indicated that he's giving them resources such as they have to keep their laptops and all the other resources that are going to help them during this time. So I think, you know, communication like that is highly appreciated during this time. We also see that peers, famous social media influencers, as well as celebrities, are also being trusted during this time. I'm now just going to share how some brands have responded during this time. We've seen our retail giants, your Spar, your Woolies, and Pick n Pay obviously coming up at the beginning of lockdown and just, pledging to say that we will serve you during this time. We've also seen other brands such as your Coca-Cola, our very own 702, your McDonald's, obviously resembling the social distancing in their logos. We've seen also Shoprite Checkers, another retail client, coming up with a virtual grocery voucher solution for people or some people like us who obviously have family members that we're taking care of in remote areas where we obviously now are confined in our homes and are unable to deliver groceries or any help. So we're able to use such solutions right now. We've also seen our government communicating with us each and every day, sending us information via the SMS line just to remind us of what is happening, where to get information. And all of that. Also in the auto category, another good example that I can think of is the Dunlop TVC, as well as the Toyota TVC, where the brands are just reassuring us that they will see us on the streets again when everything is fine again, and that we must just stay safe right now. Obviously, when it comes to issue of staying true to your purpose, one brand that has been doing well in this regard is Nando's, because we know how they, their tone is just about humor. But obviously right now, having to take into consideration the mood of how people are, they've just been able to read the mood and read the atmosphere and just come up with content that is lighthearted, that is able to make people laugh even during this time. So they've remained true to their purpose. So these are just some of the examples. Obviously, there's been many that we can share with you guys if you request them, but I just thought I could just share these so that we can get inspiration that is just much needed during this time. My section ends here. I'm just gonna wrap up with the key insights or opportunities for government. We just need to reiterate that obviously government has an opportunity to provide listeners with information pertaining to the phased approach of the lockdown, less contradictions, clear communication when it comes to that. And also people just need to understand the implications of each stage. Also at a provincial level, people have indicated that they have little knowledge around where to collect food parcels. So this is just another gap that you guys can take advantage of. And also the issue around shelter for the homeless. One important thing is around screening and testing. I think this is just going to be continuous. So it just needs to be communicated continuously. When it comes to provincial government and municipalities, they could obviously leverage radio to reach specific target markets, because we do know that with radio you're able to target according to geography and all of that, which you're able to then share the significant amount of good work that you were doing or that you continue to do during this time. Now going to hand over to Dean, who's going to take us through our digital capabilities. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, you can obviously just continue using the chat function. Thank you so much.
I'm going to take you very briefly through just 4 key things from a digital perspective at Prime Media Broadcasting at the moment. And those are the growth that we've seen across our platforms due to COVID-19, our broad digital ecosystem across all of our brands, a couple of digital opportunities that I think that we as a business think would be relevant to government communicators. And then finally, just a brief look at podcasts at Prime Media and the impact that they've had over the last couple of months. So firstly, we've seen massive impact due to COVID-19 of people coming to 702, Cape Talk and EWN, and we saw massive spikes towards the end of March and the beginning of April. but I wanted to present numbers that reflected growth over the first quarter of 2020 so that we could demonstrate clearly the onward, consistent upward growth trends that we see across all of our different platforms. So in terms of website traffic, we've seen an increase of traffic to EWN by 40% since January this year. 702 has increased by 58%, and Cape Talk has grown by over 128% in the last couple of months. Audio streaming is on the up, and it's growing to a point now where it is at true scale and real impact. We see 702 having an increase of 53% since the beginning of January this year, and KFM also increased by 20%. And then finally, podcasts, sort of the buzzword around the world at the moment. Prime Media has seen growth in terms of our organization, in terms of downloads of our content by 41% since the beginning of January this year. And I'll get into these numbers in a little bit more detail as we go through the presentation. This slide here is our digital ecosystem slide, which we update every single month and share with our clients and our partners wherever we can. What it gives is a very quick look at the size of our different audiences across radio and digital, and broken down by station, by platform. It gives you a very quick sense of the scale in terms of its platform reach for Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, our websites, the number of app downloads that we have for each of our brands, the number of newsletter subscribers, online streaming audiences, and the number of subscribers that we have to our various YouTube channels. I just wanted to highlight a couple of key points here when looking at specifically EWN and Cape Talk and 702. In a time of crisis, people around the world gravitate towards trusted organizations that share relevant information that is credible and verified. So we've seen massive, massive growth in EWN in the last couple of months, where we see surges of upward of 4.5 million users in the month of March, over 20 million in the month of March, and in the month of April, it sort of maintained those numbers as well. But at the same time, we see the same impact on 702 and Cape Talk in terms of people gravitating towards those platforms. The last thing I wanted to highlight here is that Cape Talk, which is still on an AM frequency, has a terrestrial reach of anywhere between 70 and 80,000, depending on the BRC release at that point in time. But when you look down at the impact that it has and the reach that it has in terms of its digital footprint, you see it really punches far above its weight, with over 200,000 people on Twitter, 3.5 million page views in the month of April, and actually 124,000 people streamed Cape Talk during the month of April. So when thinking of Cape Talk, beyond just the terrestrial, it has massive impact in the digital world as well. A couple of new opportunities that we are exploring at the moment, and we are all in this together right now. So webinars have become a hot button topic around the world, where businesses and clients are trying to find new ways to engage audiences in an intimate, meaningful way. And we at Prime Media are building out our capacity across all of our brands to provide interesting webinars that are with our clients and partners, like we're doing now, or co-creating them with our advertisers and clients to reach broader audiences. When we look at webinars, when it comes to sort of the build, we make sure that they are supported with an integrated media plan, so that it's not just the webinar, but it's supported with a little bit of radio to get people to register, supported with additional digital elements to get people to register as well. And the opportunities that we see here, or the potential applications, is in the time where we are not doing any outside broadcasts, there is an opportunity to fill those gaps by doing webinars and communicating to audiences what is happening on the ground. And then another one could be publicly announcing or discussing new projects or initiatives that would be led from the public sector. Next up, we have live streaming, and live streaming is something that our business has been investing in over the last number of years, and everything from live streaming big events such as Joburg Day and K-Day, to live coverage of the annual budget speech, State of the Nation, province or State of the City addresses, or even something as regular like on 702 every Friday afternoon, Azania Musaka hosts an unplugged session where she invites well-known South African musicians to play music, and we live stream that through our channels. There are two fundamental ways we look at doing live streaming for our partners and clients. And the first one is very simply, how can we amplify your events through our live streams? Now, when I say live stream, I'm talking about video streaming plus pure audio streaming. And in the past, what we've actually been able to do is take the audio stream from a State of the City address and then plug that into 702's website, for example, and amplify that to our audience. So in that sense, we can carry the entire address digitally, and it reaches an audience in a meaningful way. The other way is when we co-create events with our partners and then find ways to amplify that during the event. So it takes it from a pure audio perspective to an audio visual perspective. And then finally making sure every piece of content that we create is made available for consumption after the fact in a sort of on-demand fashion. The next thing, which I think is extremely relevant at the moment, are video explainers. We've got an amazing team of content creators within our business, both based in Johannesburg and Cape Town, who can take complex stories, complex issues, distill them down into the core of what they need to communicate, lay on beautiful visuals, publish it through our various digital platforms, and make sure that we educate and entertain and inform in a meaningful way. I'm going to show you an example of something that we've done as well, but just in terms of applications in the time of COVID-19, a short video explainer that unpacks some of the relief funds and programs that public sector that the government has been instituting, as well as the deployment of various COVID levels. I think earlier on in the end of, during level 5, we tried to make sure that we communicated effectively. So I just wanted to show you a quick video of this quickly. An example of a video explainer.
The digital economy has fundamentally changed how we live, work, and play. Adapting to the pace of digital evolution within the world of connections requires dynamic innovation and action by thought leaders and disruptors. Prime Media Broadcasting is leading the way within the media space as it offers a South African first with a monumental shift toward greater accuracy, efficiency, and accountability for.
So I'm very conscious of time, so we will share that full video with you later to ensure that you can just see what it looks like. But hopefully you got a sense of it is there. The next one is just looking at partner content articles. And this is an example of something that we did with the Department of Environmental Affairs, where they needed to raise a conversation about plastic waste. So what we do is if you have content, allow us to optimize that for our platforms, distribute it through our website, and amplify it even further through the use of social media. Again, this is available across all of our 5 platforms. EWN, as I mentioned earlier, the powerhouse that it is, there is an opportunity to own the homepage of EWN for a 24-hour period with the EWN homepage takeover. And this is a simple example of something that we did with Legal Aid, where you can see the various banner placements across the website. And you can expect anywhere between 250 and 350,000 impressions during the course of that 24-hour period. Just a tactical way when there are big announcements or big launches or days of national importance to own one of the busiest websites in the country. Finally, I just wanted to touch on podcasts very briefly. Obviously, a very, very big thing happening around the world. And these are 3 of my favorite insights. Podcasts embody 10% of all content that millennials are listening to at the moment. 39% of small and medium-sized business owners are podcast users. And finally, Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays seem to be the best days to release podcasts everywhere in the world, including when we did research on our side, it mirrored the international research as well. In terms of Prime Media, we have invested massively over the last couple of years to make sure that our infrastructure is ready to manage the scale at which we hoped to achieve. And in the last 12 months, we've reached significant scale with our organization delivering over 8.1 million downloads of podcast content. And the top 3 shows that often perform the best are The Money Show with Bruce Whitfield, The Eusebius McKaiser Show, and Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa. We see in the top 10 of the most popular shows, 8 out of those top 10 are regularly talk format content coming from both 702 and Cape Talk. We have over 40,000 subscribers to our content. Majority of people are listening via their mobile devices, and majority of them are coming from South Africa. Finally, final slide for this presentation. I just wanted to share with you a brief case study on something that we did with the Gauteng Department of Education at the beginning of stage 5. Matric revision series, matric revision was a big hot topic because people were not able to go to school. And what the department actually did is they gathered a whole bunch of content from various educators around the province and needed to distribute that content through various platforms. We unfortunately couldn't carry the full 30, 40, 50-minute episodes on the radio, but what we were able to do is publish them as podcasts and then use our radio platforms to encourage people to listen to those podcasts. This was a very, very short burst campaign. We had 3 revision sessions for 702 and 3 for 947. And during the course of this 1-week campaign, we delivered over 700,000 impressions on Facebook, 8,500 downloads of the podcast content. And actually, as of yesterday morning, when I looked at the numbers again, that number had risen even further to 10,000, just showing that podcasts are reaching people where they need it, when they need it, and provided that the content is relevant and reaches people in their need and adds value to their lives, people will find a way to download that content. But that is all from me. If you guys have any questions, please do feel free to pop them in the chat below. Alternatively, please do send me a mail and I will promptly respond with anything and everything that you guys need. Thank you so much for your time. Over to you, Tsatsi.
Thank you, Dean. We do have a question. I need you, Dean, to put your programming hat on. I know you're not a programmer, but here's a question from Megan Firth. How does Prime Media plan to disseminate the changes in lockdown levels considering its reach? And how does Prime Media aim to ensure the dissatisfaction levels are reduced?
That's a very, very, very good question. And I think you mentioned that Mahlatse is actually a part of this webinar as well as a guest. What the EWN is actually doing twice daily is that they are releasing a situation desk with information that's coming directly out of the NICD. We have a daily update, one in the morning, one in the evening, with all the latest updates from the government. The content is made available on YouTube, where we have over 200,000 subscribers. Majority of them are spread around the country. And then secondly, that content is also made available as a podcast. So we are trying our very best to make sure the content is relevant, credible, and distributed as widely as possible.
Great, thank you. Michael Karin, I'd like to recognize him. We will work closely with GCIS and their research team moving forward. Melissa, you saw that comment, right?
I have.
And then, a question from Stibulin Tombela from Brand SA. It's directed to Sharon or anyone actually in the panel. Other than GCIS, did other government departments intensify their efforts in communication COVID-19 regulations? Did you guys measure the pride levels during COVID-19? Brand SA. So are people proudly South African? Did we measure the levels of so Mel, I think you can answer that, and Sharon, you can touch on other departments. Yeah.
In terms of the levels of pride, we've seen that they've hovered around very similar levels pre-COVID and during COVID. It'll be interesting to look at it post-COVID as well, and around significant dates such as presidential addresses. So we'll be tracking that, but this number that you're seeing, it doesn't tend to significantly sway or change with our listeners. So having a significant amount of pride. And when we do dig into it deeper, what we do see is that pride is being driven by a number of factors, but mainly in terms of how South Africans get together and they're able to do good together. And that's really an underlying theme that we see in a lot of our research. So really interesting, and I'd love to work with you on that kind of data going forward as Brand SA.
Sharon, any commentary? Other than GCIS, did any other government department intensify their efforts in COVID-19? I could say we've seen stuff obviously from the Department of Health, and we are trying to assist, and definitely labor. Lots of
labor. I was going to say labor as well.
I think labor more than anyone has been intense. This is UIF compensation fund and labor and employment. I think they've been communicating much more than most of the departments. Guys, we are a minute over time. So thank you very much for joining us on this webinar. we look forward to the follow-up webinars, hoping that you can join us. Thank you very much. Cheers, everyone.